All right. Well, welcome everybody. Thank you so much for finding time in your busy schedules to join us for what is our state today, Martin Shields and Michaela Glasgow. It's an exciting day here back home in Alberta. Martin, I know you're not here with us to celebrate stage 2 of the summer reopening plan, but back here in the restaurant today, it's been so good to see people out and about. And I know that after this call, my wife and I are going to go out for dinner and do our own little celebration. So it's exciting to see that the road to recovery is on the way, and we're winning this war against COVID. So we're all thrilled that you could join us today and share some perspective to the business community about your thoughts on how the past year has gone, and perhaps share with us a bit what to look forward to in the future. And then, of course, we know that there's been some questions provided for the chamber that Margaret will ask you for some Q&A. So with that, I'm going to pass it over to Margaret, who is our executive director, and she will do a formal introduction.
All right, thank you,
George. Get on with the presentation. Margaret, over to you.
Well, thank you. Thank you for inviting me to come.
And thank you for attending, Martin. We really appreciate this opportunity for you to let our business community know what is happening in the federal government, because that does affect us at the provincial and business level. Yeah, we look forward to hearing what you have to say. And then we do have a short list of questions to ask you afterwards. So the floor is yours. And let me just remove this screen so we can see you better.
Well, I've got a little more light on. It's great. Thank you. Karen from my staff is with us, which is great. Thank you, Karen, her husband, Hubie, county councilor. Glad to have them on. And it's good to see people that I know. And that's great. You know, it's interesting when you said, Jordan, about the excitement of today in Alberta. My daughter, Carrie, who some of you do know, came today from Penticton to Ottawa, which is great. And people often come and find it very different in Ontario. 4 weeks ago when I came to Ontario, I went on the streets, and we're talking a major city in Canada. I took a lot of pictures. You didn't see a person. You didn't see a vehicle in the downtown area of Ottawa. It was like the Twilight Zone. There was very few, but a few restaurants doing takeout, but very few. It is so much more in the sense of closed down here than in Alberta. And so people notice that when they come to Ontario. It's been more closed down. This weekend, for the first time, there's going to be patio. And I watched in my neighborhood as the patios are going up, the umbrellas are going up. And it looks like there's some life out there. And I think, Jordan, what you said is going to explode here, in the sense people are going to be so happy to be out and able to do the type of things they haven't been. I've got a major shopping center across the street, 200 to 300 stores in it. There's a small grocery store, a drugstore, and a limited hours of an alcohol store. That's all that's still open in that shopping center. That's it. Things have been very much more tied down and closed in Ontario than we are familiar with in Alberta. And so I think people here are ready. So when you say you're going to be celebrating, I'll give you an example of the difference between mentality that we hear in the office about it. We hear lots of people saying we need the border open, we need to be able to travel. The provincial government, up until last week, I saw ads on TV, the provincial government trying to push the federal government to tighten the borders more. So that depends on which part of Canada you're in. Nova Scotia, the Premier's talking about having a vaccine passport to come to Nova Scotia when they get to July 1. So you see variations across. So we have MPs who come from different parts of Canada. Some of them don't come because of the 2-week quarantine going home, so they don't come because they don't want to face that 2-week quarantine. If you're in Manitoba, we don't see the MPs from Manitoba here. We don't see them from the Maritimes because they face those quarantines going home. So there's some of us that from different provinces spend more time in Ottawa than other MPs do because they don't want to face those quarantines coming and going. So it's been a challenge. Karen works in our office in Brooks, which is great, but there are a lot of offices that people strictly work from home, and a lot of employees for Ottawa. I was talking to one the other day, and I'm saying, so I'll come over to your office. Says, well, I haven't been in my office for 15 months. I work from home. So we have a tremendous amount of the staff in Ottawa working for the government. They don't work in their offices. They work at home if they can. So that really sets a different tone in a major city when the major employer, the people aren't in the downtown core and the major office buildings for the government, for the private sector, they're not here. So you really notice a difference in the sense of the amount of people that are out and about. It is much less. When I came back to Brooks the last time I was here, I went, wow, there's people, there's cars, people driving around, people on the street. And so Ottawa has been a very different place. And Jordan, thank you for making that comments for businesses. I'm hearing stories now. I just got off the line before this one with a person in the oil fields that has rigs in Brooks. He says he's interviewed 100 people and only got 15 people that he could hire that wanted to come to work out of those 100 people. So he says, I'm struggling. He says, I've only got enough manpower to run one rig. That's all I could get to hire. We're hearing now stories, people don't interview anymore. If you walk in, you're hired. You walked in the door, you're hired. So I'm hearing that from business people that they are struggling now to get back open to find people who are willing to work and come to work. So from when you're talking about a business side, that's what I'm hearing is they attempt to reopen, attempt to do things. There's a shortage of people out there. So that's what I'm being told from people within Alberta and in the constituency. They're short of people to go to work. So I think that's part of the challenge. I think the lockdown is virtually will come to a close fairly quickly in the sense of a lot of restrictions being lifted in a variety of ways. The provinces do most of the lockdown scenarios. For example, in Ontario, the schools are not in and they won't run the rest of the year, and they've been out probably 3 times as long out of school as they have been in Alberta. So you find a lot of differences in the sense of those lockdowns. So the opening up is the same way that you find differences from province to province. The vaccine passports is a topic that I've heard about extensively in my office from constituents. The cruise line industry, for example, how they're now trying to get people back on the cruise lines. Vancouver, because of the lockdown, the cruise lines are now going around Vancouver. That's a major, major hit economically in Vancouver. The Florida governor says you can't implement a vaccine passport in his state. So he and the cruise lines are trying to figure out, because they're saying you have to have something to get on their boats. So I think we're going to see some of that in the sense of, we know that finally the government is going to say if you've been vaccinated and you leave, you can come back without the quarantine that's coming. What we'd like to get rid of is that hotel quarantine. That because of their advisory council out here a couple of weeks ago and saying there's no science behind that. If you're going to do stay at home, there's no science to say staying in a hotel is any better. So we hope that gets gone very quickly. So opening back up is something that needs to happen for businesses. This unprecedented lockdown of this long is just, you people are in the business sector. You know people that may not come back from this, and it is tough. It is tough out there. So specific questions. I'll quit talking.
Oh, we always appreciate all your comments, Martin. So yeah, let's get to the questions. So what is your government doing to help advocate for Alberta's reopening? So your position, of course, is to represent those of us in Alberta. Is there any advocacy with your level of government to assist with the reopenings?
That's two-sided in the sense that obviously we all are represented by MLAs. I do a mayors and reeves Zoom meeting that some people can get to. Margaret, you're busy. But I have a number of MLAs that are often on that. So we talk about that, and the MLAs, it's a good discussion of what they're doing. And of course, that's something as in government, what they can do. What we have done extensive lobbying on behalf of businesses in the sense of one supports, two things that can be done with legislation or changes. And I've worked on the travel advisor agents. Those are small businesses in our communities that really are in tough shape. It's 85% female, by the way. And they lost their commissions. Their commissions were clawed back. Let's say if 2 years ago I had booked a trip and they got a commission, that got clawed back by Air Canada and WestJet. So they lost their commissions that they'd already, and then so for the last 15 months, they have been doing a lot of files for people who they had made reservations and needed to be changed, canceled, whatever, without a commission, and they're not gaining any commissions yet, and they're going to be probably 2 to 3 years without much of a return. So those are small businesses that in our communities, and there's many. I've met with them by Zoom. I've lobbied on their behalf, petitions for them, because they're a sector, and we've had many MPs doing the same thing, because it's a niche sector in our community. Sometimes we forget about it. But they're the small businesses in all our communities are the travel agents, travel advisors, and they are in desperate shape. And we're going to lose a number of those businesses, and some of them are gone already. They just can't come back with the lost revenue and how long it will be before they get revenue. So that's a tough piece that within the riding that I've worked with, because it's hard. It's really hard for small businesses, and that's one particular one that's in our communities that it's been really brutal on.
Well, much appreciate all the advocacy efforts you've been doing. What happens if vaccines do not reach 75%? So again, you'd be looking more at the federal side. And then I was hoping Michaela might be able to sign in to let us know provincially what might be happening, because we know that as we watch the maps, we can see some areas are getting really close to that 70%, whereas other regions are below that 50%. Do you foresee any restrictions that might happen in those regions that don't make it to the 75%?
Yeah, so the role of the federal government has been to secure the vaccines, and then the province distributes them. So most of that, in a sense, we were behind in sense of securing them, because the federal government attempted to make a deal with the Chinese Communist government that went sideways. So once they got into it and they've got them, and there's a lot now being distributed, the provinces began to set percentages by which they would open up in this. So it varies across the country from province to province. Some at 60%. I think we've got one of the provinces that talks about 80%. Is a benchmark number. That's pretty high. Manitoba started, I think yesterday, announced the plan. It's like some of the United States are doing. They've got about a $2 million pocket of money that they're out there now trying to incentivize people to get your shot to win some money. And I think that comes down to, I think the 60% was very quickly achievable in most parts of the country. And the next target was 70. And I think that's probably where most are going to get before they think that that's good enough. But it's that last piece. Now, if you get to our province and then to our riding, in the south part of our riding, and you would know this one, and you probably know it, that the level of vaccinations in the southern part of this riding is low. We have a percentage of population that's in our ag sector who will not do vaccinations. These are a critical part of our ag labor force. And if you mandated they did it, if there's any mandate that required anything that they do, whether it's travel back and forth to Mexico, for example, or to do anything, if there's any push on them, they've just said, we're going back to Mexico and staying. That is an economic piece that could be tough for us in this riding, especially in the southern half of it. And Margaret, that's in your neighborhood, and you probably know that one.
Yes.
And maybe that's why the question's there.
Well,
I have.
It affects the Southeast, and Brooks is a part of that.
Yeah.
When I look at the map, right? Brooks is
Yeah.
a little bit higher than some of the other regions, but we are still under that 50%. So,
yeah, I haven't heard anything in the sense of any province saying that they would do it by regions. They've all talked about provincial numbers. So
okay.
I haven't seen any province say that it's by a region or there will be penalties for a region. I haven't heard that anywhere. But I know it is a concern in this riding because of the low numbers. I've never been in favor of mandatory, and I really don't like vaccination passports because that's going to penalize people for the free choices they make. Let's say, for example, if Costco said, "Yep, come to our store, you have to have vaccinations and proof of it." Boy, you're getting into an area where I don't think businesses want to go. But the public has got to be careful here of what they demand in the sense of, and I know the airlines probably will be there because if you fly to somewhere that requires it, then you may be forced. And I know people who've gotten vaccinations who weren't in favor of vaccinations just so they can travel. Yep, there's a hand, Cecilia. So I don't know. It's going to, when you set targets at 60%, I think that's fairly easily to achieve. 70%, that's where the challenge is. If you're going to go above 70%, that could be the incentive things where you see Manitoba going to try to get to those numbers by doing the lottery prizes type of thing. Yeah.
So Martin, do you mind taking Sylvia's question?
Sure.
Oh. We can't hear you, Cecilia. Are you?
Oh, I'm
there
okay.
We go. I think I said Sylvia. My bad.
I thought she was putting her hand up because she got vaccination so she could travel.
Yeah, that was it.
Oh, that was it. Okay, no problem. Sorry. All right, so Martin, you did touch on two things that I do have notes on here. Would you mind, and I know you're looking at the federal, not the provincial side of things, I just want to clarify for everyone listening. Mandatory vaccines, you've touched on it a bit. Lot of misinformation out there. Can you tell us if there's any discussion at all on mandatory vaccines from the federal government?
At this point, no. But we know there may be, like travel, it may be that they do it, like the cruise ships, and it may be in the travel industries where we see it. We know that at the G7, they're talking about it this coming week in the sense the EU has developed something inside the EU. I tend to think as we get past this, it will decrease. Because the percentage of people having been vaccinated. The other side of this, and I've been called in the House an extremist and a tin hat wearer by the Minister of Health because people have explored other things besides vaccines and they believe in them. They may be vitamins, they may be a drug called ivermectin, they may be other things. And I'm very leery of people saying they shouldn't be, or they shouldn't depend on, or they should be shunned because they do. I think there's a lot of power in what people believe. And if they believe something works for them, we have to be careful about labeling them different things. But the minister liked to label me as an extremist for bringing that up for a reason why it shouldn't be mandatory.
And the other thing you've kind of mentioned is passports. I think you did cover that, but just our question was, do you foresee the federal government implementing that for Canada? So anyone traveling into Canada would have to have the vaccine.
I think that is probably something that they will consider as other countries do a similar thing. I've always been a proponent right from the beginning. This is what's called rapid testing, rapid testing, rapid testing. Those tests have been available and they haven't been used. In other countries, they have been. Let's say, for example, in England, school kids get 2 of those every week and they take them themselves. This is not a test that I'm familiar with, but ladies can do pregnancy tests at home without a nurse to supervise it.
Yeah,
I mean,
and it's about that easy too. Yeah.
Yeah, and so we should have been into rapid testing a long time. The testing where you have to have medical supervision has made no sense to me. And so traveling is the same thing. Do quick test, rapid test, rapid test. You get a positive, then you further test. And I think that's my rationale is you don't close the economy down when we had a mechanism to deal with that tracing to begin with through rapid testing. So other countries are now using it. So I think if we got into that more, then that vaccine passport can lessen in the sense of it need to be. That's my opinion. And I've expressed that in the House and a few other places.
Oh, appreciate it. Yeah, because I know some of the schools have what do I want to call it? Like their testing group for it, but not all schools have this. And us chambers, we just got access to the rapid testing so that we can help out our businesses. Because the whole idea is if you get 3 employees that test positive, you're closed, you know, so we want to avoid that for our businesses. So we really appreciate getting those rapid tests so we can help the employers.
And those rapid tests were available a long time ago. Businesses should have had that option a long time ago because they've been in the province's hands for more than a year, and they should have been used. And that's what the shot the minister takes back at me. He says, well, the province has got them. Why aren't they using them? But I was talking about travel at the point that is something the federal government is involved in. But yeah, for businesses, they should have had them, should have been using them. And the school situation, if somebody's in contact with somebody in a whole high school, all of a sudden you got classes all over the place gone because they were walked down a hallway that somebody tested positive for. Oh, yeah, we've put our kids in a difficult place. I met with the Optometrist Association, and on the line was the person from an employee in Brooks, his own business with an optometrist. And he did the actual, we get lots of lobbyists that want to meet with us. My requirement is you want to meet with me, then there's got to be somebody from the constituency. And so they had the optometrist from Brooks doing the presentation, and he did a great presentation. And part of it was to do with what people are facing coming out of this, the amount of time they've been in front of a screen. And they had a great factual presentation on the deteriorating eyes that are going to happen and the disease that follow it and the cost to our health system. And it was a great presentation. And Foresight owner did a good job of that. And I brought that up in the House. And it was interesting because the health minister did respond and said, we're becoming more aware that we've got a health problem coming out of COVID. I got a grade 10 granddaughter. Her average screen time is 19 hours a day. Wow. She goes to sleep and has the screen on at night.
Saw a lot of other wows on the screen here.
We've got a generation that's going to have, and a lot of us, the number of hours we're spending on screens is significantly higher, but it's really interesting to listen to the optometrist talk about the challenges that's going to be in our population out of COVID. Is the long-term repercussions for eye problems, glaucoma, you name it, diabetes connection with it. So it was great to have somebody, the optometrist from Foresight, from Brooks, make the presentation on this particular issue. It was great. Did a good job. So good business in Brooks. But as lobbyists, they know the rule. You want to talk to me? Then you better have somebody from the constituency to talk to me. It was funny. The Canola Association wanted to meet with me, and I said, I need somebody from Canola. And I got back, well, we have nobody from your riding connected with Canola. Well, they got sort of a sharp letter back saying, we have thousands of people involved in Canola in this riding, and if you can't find one of them, you got a problem.
You've been on Zoom too often, and your eyes are becoming poor.
Yeah. Yeah, Karen deals with that as well. I know she gets office calls and has dealt with that before, as my staff does. Yeah, you want to talk to them? Find somebody from the constituency.
Wonderful. So, Martin, I think this is a perfect segue into mental health. So COVID has really put us all into a situation that we have never been in, we've never experienced, and there's been changes with the generations and what they've experienced, like kids who don't have a childhood like we've all experienced in the past, and we're still dealing with addictions, and that that has been kept a little bit quieter because COVID has been front and center. So is your government looking at any supports coming out of COVID for mental health and addiction concerns?
Absolutely. One of the things with health, only 3% of the money is spent on public health, proactive. 97% is spent on those people that fall off the cliff and an ambulance picks them up and drives them to a hospital. That's where 97% of our money is spent, which means we're not dealing with the issue before they fall off the cliff. And mental health is exaggerating. One of the things that we really pushed, and we had unanimous consent in the House for, motions are non-binding, but it was 100% approved, it was establishing that 3-digit code number, like 911, but there's one that's designated as 988 in the US mental health line. And we've been pushing and have got a lot of support from the agencies, the people in the country that deal with the issues, to establish a national 3-digit number for mental health calls. We need it, and we need it now, because coming out of this, we're starting to hear numbers of addiction. We're hearing numbers of abuse. We're hearing numbers of absolute depression. My staff dealt with a particular situation where eventually you get very concerned about the information you get, and you call the RCMP to do a health check. That's coming, and more so. And we believe that a one step is this. People all know 911. It's just something that everybody knows what 911. We believe that that's one step, and that can be federal, of pushing that nationwide mental health hotline. The US is doing it. We should be doing it. So that's one step, one little step. The opioid crisis, if we think a lot of people died from COVID, check the numbers on how many people have died from overdoses of opioid. It's much higher and growing. So the drug problem is out there, and it's not getting better, it's getting worse. So the opioid crisis is really a problem. So I agree. We need to be more proactive with public health. I'll go back to the optometrist. I said to the optometrist, you know, when I went to school, the optometrist came and screened all the kids at school. We don't do that anymore. The dentist came to the school, checked all the kids on their teeth. We don't do that anymore. We don't do some of those proactive public health things that we used to do. So we're not spending enough money on the public health side of things, and mental health is going to be a challenge.
All right, one last question on COVID. Has COVID taught us how to prepare for future pandemics? Is there any planning currently taking place?
You know, we have very short memories.
Yes.
Very short memories. You know, the PPE stuff that in 2016, the government says, we don't need to store that anymore, and threw it away. Will we remember what we needed? Will we remember the industries? Will we get back into the chemicals that produce drugs? For 60 years now, we have downsized and basically gotten out of producing, but we've got lots of capability in the supply.
Because I only got one hearing aid. I can hear hardly.
We've got the capabilities of producing a lot more medications in the supply chain, but we've gotten out of it. As many things that we do now, our supply chains are based in other parts of the world, but we've got the capability of doing a lot more with the medical. I mean, Providence and Calgary, who was willing to get into the business, and the government ignored it and ignored it and ignored it. That's sad. I do think that they maybe looked at it, but what we have on the drugs, I'll tell you a bit on the drug side. We have really gotten out of it, and we have set up two pieces. We've got public health, or the Health Canada. If you're a drug company, a foreign drug company, and you want to have a drug distributor in Canada, you apply to Health Canada, and they go through it to make sure it's safe. But we have a price marketing board that sits down the hallway, and their goal is try to get that drug at the most economical price for Canadians. Here's the downside of that. we have a lot of drugs in the world that are produced that are not in Canada. Cystic fibrosis is one of them. Trikafta is a drug that is produced that 90% of the people who have cystic fibrosis, they live a normal life. That is available in a lot of countries, not in Canada, because the company wouldn't bring it to Canada because the pricing of it, they didn't want to face that pricing review board because they didn't think they would make it economically viable to bring it to Canada. They've now finally brought it to get it approved. If they get it approved, it faces that pricing board. And then we've got 10 provinces who have to decide whether or not they want to do it. So we've got some problems. There is world-class drug development that goes on outside of our country that isn't inside of our country. When it's outside of our country, it faces barriers. And so cystic fibrosis is one of those. And it's sad because during COVID, they had they're at risk because of the type of disease COVID is with our lungs. And they faced more risks than most people did, but yet they couldn't get the drug that would have made them healthy. So we've got some problems when we depend on all of our drugs coming from outside the country and have lost the capability to produce them inside of our country. So the barriers are tough there. Now, the positive side of this, the drug lords out there, for example, in Mexico and Colombia, they were sourcing their chemicals from China. They lost that. So they were struggling to make their drugs for the drug market because they were depending on the supply chain out of China. So that was a good thing. I went sideways, I know.
Oh no, that was quite interesting. So there was through some of that some proactive assistance with addictions then is what you're telling us.
Yeah.
Yeah, it would be really nice if we did have short-term memory and we became more a country concerned about being proud and producing our own and supporting our own. That would make a big difference, because that was one of the things we found right away with the start of COVID is we couldn't get supplies because none of it existed in our own country.
And for businesses now, for example, I've talked to the farm industry, I've talked to the irrigation guys. We talked to our appliance businesses. I don't know if anybody's on in those businesses. The chips that go into them are in short supply in the world. So if you're producing anything with chips in it, Jordan, that may be something that you know about, whether the machinery involved in your businesses, the chips are in short supply. If you're a car dealer and you have high-end vehicles for sale, you're not going to get high-end vehicles with any bells and whistles on it because it takes extra chips. So if you want a very fancy, nice vehicle, navigation in it, some of those things we become depending on, you're not going to get them. I talked to an automotive dealer in Strathmore a couple of days ago, and he said, we can't get anything that the customer wants because there's no extras added onto them. All we get is straight plain vehicles. So in the implement, farm machinery is the same thing, very high technologically chips in them. And so it's a problem there. The irrigation piece is an interesting one because there's some shortage of irrigation. The ID, for example, when they expanded, part of the thing when you have acreage, you're going to expand, you have to have a pivot on that by the end of August this year. What the EID has done is said, if you've got a bill of sale from an irrigation dealer, we will accept that because we know you're not going to get it this year. We'll accept that in expanding the acreages. So we have all sorts of challenges. The appliance dealer, I was in Vulcan, they basically have nailed their appliances to the store or to the floor and their furniture. You can order stuff, but they won't sell anything out because they can't get it replaced. They said to get, so we've got problems in the supply chains for businesses, and it's going to be a challenge. If you're in a business, and it's great to have a great storefront and great advertising, but if you can't have a product that people can get, that puts you in a very, very hard place.
Oh, you have a question. Oh,
yes.
Yeah, go ahead.
Comment on that. I know guys that have ordered new trucks and they haven't gotten them for 4 or 5 months because they can't get the computer parts built fast enough for them. That's the way that it is in the car industry right now.
Yeah.
So.
And then that backs up into the used ones, and then the used ones are all gone. You can't find a half decent used car out there because they don't have them. Go to a dealer's lot.
Auction sales.
Nothing in
Yeah.
there.
Auction sales, yeah.
Yeah, they're thin. They thin, and they, you know, yeah. So their inventory is in tough shape.
Yeah, my husband, we had to order his motorcycle tires online. We almost couldn't find any tires for his bike because all that kind of stuff is short supply, and we see what's happening with the lumber. I heard the Tabor Chamber, they're on hold for building their new building because they're waiting for the costs of lumber to go down, of building supplies to go down, which hurts the economy more, because if you're not buying it, you know, you're not putting people to work.
Yeah, 3 years ago, the lumber yards, the big lumber yards in BC, they didn't have any room to stack up the trees because they weren't moving it. You go to those places in BC now, they don't have any sticks left. They've sold everything they've got their hands on because everybody's building, remodeling, building, whatever, because they get the time to do it. So yeah, that's a brutal pricing. Anything connected to wood is just outrageous these days in the sense of what it was.
Martin, I have someone who would like to ask a question. Sandra from the Brooks Bulletin would like to ask a question.
Who?
Good afternoon, Mr. Shields. How are you?
Good.
I'm not on. Sorry, just my voice.
Okay.
Good afternoon, Mr. Shields. I am going to ask one COVID question very quickly, but then I'm going to get away from it because we're all, you know, sick of it. You had mentioned, and I'm not sure if I heard this correctly, you're saying that the agricultural workers are not getting their shots. Did I hear you correctly?
There is a segment of our agricultural population that work in agriculture who do not want to take a vaccination. They don't believe in it.
Are they Canadian citizens, or are they the workers that are coming in?
They are people who have resident status and Canadians. These are not temporary foreign workers.
Okay, so they're coming into work for the 8 months of the year and then going back. Is that correct?
Some of them, and some of them actually live here year round.
Okay, so my question is, do a lot of these people who are not living here, do they even know that they can get a vaccine here even though they are not a Canadian citizen?
You're going to have to rephrase that one.
Many of the workers who come into work and are agricultural hands, perhaps are from Mexico, for example. Do they know that they can get a vaccine here even though they are not a Canadian citizen?
Yes. And that's a different category. And those people that are involved with them, understanding, they make, very aware of that. This is different. These are people who know what they know about vaccinations, but they choose not to be vaccinated.
Okay, my next question has to do with the election. Is there any news on September, October, November? What's the kind of discussion in the House these days?
You know, it's one of the fun things in Ottawa at this time of year, the prediction of when there could be an election. The pundits would say that the Liberals have a window from late August to early October. They don't want to interfere with the municipal election in November in Quebec. They're not so as concerned about one in Alberta. That's the time the pundits would suggest there's a window that the Liberals would may be interested in doing. Now, the Liberals don't want to call the election themselves. They would prefer that somehow or another they trigger it by the opposition, so they can't be blamed for having an election. So who knows when they will call it. I believe that the Liberals will find a way to do it if they believe the polls are right for them to win a majority government. This is an interesting situation because the seats that they want to win a majority government are seats that are held by the Bloc in Quebec that used to be held by either the NDP or the Liberals. So we know there's significant priority as to what the polls are saying in Quebec for this particular Liberal government.
Okay, two more questions, maybe not so quickly answered. You had briefly before this started to be recorded, you were talking about the Netflix tax or the streaming tax. I'm going to assume that it will affect all streaming services, not just Netflix. Is that correct?
Yeah, and that's a good point. One of the things that I've mentioned in our committee meetings and when I've talked about this, they should be upfront in the sense of where these costs are going to go to. It's one thing to say they need to pay their fair share. But as you know, if a business is faced with increased costs, who pays them? The consumer. There have been sort of studies done this that it could be up to a 50% increase in cost to the consumers of streaming services. My point is, be honest and be upfront. You want to collect the tax? Who's going to pay for it? And the streaming services, all of them, it would apply to. And in the end, that cost will go back to the consumer. Be upfront about it and be honest.
50% is pretty steep.
I said up to.
Yes. No, I understand. Okay, my final question, this one I'm not, anyway. The Keystone XL pipeline has now been canceled. What's next?
In terms of?
Where do we go from here with a canceled pipeline?
Well, you're not going to go anywhere with it other than fill railway cars up in the States so they can haul it to a refinery. And we know who owns the railway cars and who makes a lot of money out of that. And because he's one of the most richest people in the world. So that railway, as long as the US government makes those decisions, that's where it'll be stuck.
The federal government paid for a portion of that rail line, of the portion of the Keystone XL pipeline. Did they not?
Provincial government.
Provincial, not federal.
Yeah.
Okay. And that is it for right now. Thank you.
One of the things, Sandra, one of the things I have worked on is the weekly newspapers. If you follow me in social media or in the house, you will know that. We have a huge problem in the sense of finances for our weekly newspapers, and the country has lost lots of them. I've worked with the Alberta Newspapers Association. In this riding, we have 9 weekly newspapers and a couple of excellent monthly productions that come in rural Alberta. The Milo Canopers, they're a funny paper they put out once a month. Carmen Gay's got one. So the money that they have lost to advertising from the federal government is huge. They're down to 1/3 of 1% of the funding they used to get from federal government for advertising. Now, where did the money go? The federal government is giving it to the international streaming companies of Facebook, Google, all those. That's where they're spending their advertising dollar. Now, sure, the dailies get some as well, but the weeklies, they have basically left them out. Those are the papers in our communities and in this riding. They cover what the chambers do. They cover what businesses do. They cover a lot of things, the municipal politics, the school board, the events that happen in our communities. And they are real risk of closing. If they close, the Calgary Herald and the Lethbridge Herald and the Medicine Hat News are not going to cover those things. And so I have been working with them, lobbying on their behalf, getting attention to how those weekly newspapers are critical in our communities. We've got great weekly newspapers, but they're hanging on by their teeth of staying alive. So that's an area that I have spent considerable time in and lobbying. They're great people in those. And somebody says, wow, they write editorials that or this or that. I says, I don't care what their editorials are. I don't care. I just want them to be alive. So people have got a place to read about what's happening in their community, and they've got people who can write letters to the editor saying whatever they like. And so this is a tough one for us. If we lose our weekly papers, and there are hundreds have been closed across the country in the last couple of years, and a lot of it has to do with advertising and the federal advertising money, to me, being spent in foreign countries for the mega streamers. It makes no sense to me.
And thank you for
dollars left.
Thank you for that. I mean, there's 50% of my streaming dollars. That's where it should be going, into the weekly newspapers, or up to 50% of my streaming dollars should be going into the newspapers. And that's key.
Yeah.
Oh, there you are. Sorry, you moved on my screen. And that's key. So, I mean, it's not just the federal government, though, that is pulling away their advertising. It's the federal government who perhaps was supporting someone. Let's just use the chamber as an example. Maybe they were getting some federal money. The chamber can't support the small newspapers to put their advertising into because everyone's being pulled back. And then again, we have social media, Facebook. A business is not being tapped to advertise on social media. So there's a whole bunch of issues that as we enter or are well into the 21st century that are just going to progressively get worse until they get better, which no one really knows what's going to happen.
Yep. And and we've got a number of our papers that are both print and digital. It's not that they're behind the times. They're using whatever resources they can to try to stay alive. So it is a tough one in rural communities in the sense of those weekly papers. So that's something I work on. And I appreciate what they do.
Thank you.
All right, Martin, 2 final questions for you. I know we only have 5 minutes, so we'll see how quickly we can get through them. Just want to be mindful of your time and everyone else's. So for businesses that are watching, do you know if there's any new programs coming, such as assistance with reopening? A lot of businesses were closed. They got to hire staff. They maybe have to do some tweaks to their businesses to reopen, or anything for technology and tourism. I know there's some stuff mentioned in the federal budget for tourism, but do you know of anything coming down the pipeline soon?
And that's a good question, because we have really lobbied on behalf of the tourist sector because it is really critical to a lot of communities, and it's sector specific, highly female employees in a lot of it as well. And so it is one that is really needed. Here's the thing, we're in an election cycle, as you know, and the Liberal government has $100 billion that they haven't designated what they're going to spend it on. $100 billion in that budget. The numbers are so big, we sort of just go over our heads these days. We believe that they are going to use some of that involved with the election. They can't resist. So there may be something that will occur in an election campaign that the Liberals promise. The only problem with a lot of their promises, it's always back-ended 3 or 4 years later that you get it. But I do believe there will be some attempts, because there is a lot of pressure. The Canadian chambers, the business organizations of Canada have done a very good job of lobbying on behalf of businesses and saying how tough it's going to be to reopen, to stay in business, to stay alive. So they're doing a good job of it. One of the problems that the Liberal government is they're blind to small businesses. They see 100 people employed as a small business. And that's been problematic for us. They don't see in some of their programs what small businesses are. Under 10 to them is a blind spot. They talk about small businesses with 100 employees. So in some of the programs they've done, that's been a tough blind spot. People that, example, were their own business people, they're still struggling to try to find how these programs can work for them. You had to have a business account. You had to have this. You had to, these kind of records. A lot of people that are single businesses are just running out of their bank account. They don't have a separate bank account. They don't have accountants, and so the programs just haven't worked for a lot of our independent businesses. And so that's a blind spot they've had and that we've really tried to work on. So it's a challenge. Yep. I know you got a couple minutes, but I got to have one thing left to say before you run out of time.
Okay, so I got one thing, because I always like to end on a positive note. And this past year, there hasn't been a whole lot of positives, but is there something that you're most proud of this past year?
Most proud of?
Most proud of.
One of the things that I do is I do travel around the riding, and I stop at businesses, whether it's a farm, street business, door knocking. There are tremendous people in this riding. We have got innovative in agriculture, in oil, in small businesses. we've got people trying to do the best they can. There are so many good people that I get to meet and see what they're doing. That's the best thing for me, is when I can get out and travel in the riding, stop into businesses, talk with them, listen to what they want to do, how they're trying to get things done. Karen's there. She's traveled with me at times. It's just such a positive experience that I like to do that, get out and see people, because we've got great businesses. We've got smart people out there. Most of the time, the governments just need to get the hell out of their way. And we've got a diverse cultures in our area. We've got fantastic people from a variety of places in the world. And to appreciate what all these people in this riding bring to us and in our communities is just phenomenal. How's that?
We appreciate everything that you do for us, most definitely, including attend these events and having some questions off the floor. So Martin, thank you so much.
I've got one thing to do.
And I want to give you the opportunity to say that last thing that you wanted to say.
Other than my calendar is starting to fill up in August. By the way, Bazzano's going to do the parade and the rodeo in August this year. We're going to find that it's going to be lots of busy stuff. And I don't know about that mayor getting me on a horse and Tabor for the parade, but that's what he's trying to get me to do. I wear a button that says I love, in symbols, I love oil and gas. I've been wearing it for years, daily and everywhere. And I've been warned many times in the House of Commons that you can't do that. I know the speaker well, and we sort of joke back and forth about it. Well, one day a member of parliament called me on it and said, that's against the rules, you can't do it. So the speaker and I are going back and forth about what I'm going to do. I had two choices. I'm in the middle of making a speech about the budget and taking questions. I could take it off and set it down and continue on. Or if I left it on, I would be expelled from the House of Commons. Now, if I'm expelled from the House of Commons, the only way I can get back in is to come and apologize for wearing the button. So I took it off. The next day, I'm back in the House wearing it. And joking with the speaker says, oh, you got your button back on today. Yep. Well, we'll see if anybody objects. Yep. Good. But I'm wearing my button. So it's one of those things that it's fun on the inside. I'm proud to wear it. But some people from the outside probably think that maybe they're just childish games going on. But, you know, a lot of us know what we're doing and what we stand for. But on the outside, it might look a little weird. But again, it's something that I did, and I'm not going to apologize for it.
Yeah. Oh, we appreciate you advocating on our behalf for whether it's oil, whether it's ag, whether it's those small business, those mom and pop shops, whatever it is, we appreciate it. So we applaud you, Martin.
Well, chambers have got a strong role to play in our community. And as you know, over the years, I really appreciate it. My wife was on the chamber board for many years. So she was in Medicine Hat College, and she was on the chamber for many years on the board. So, yep. Great organizations, really believe you do a great job.
Well, thank you so much. Thank you everyone who attended. Thank you for submitting your questions early. Thank you for the bulletin for sneaking in a couple questions too, making sure we get that well-rounded, representing everyone, because that's what it's all about. So thank you everyone. Have a wonderful night, and hopefully have a wonderful, more open and fun summer.
It's coming. It's coming. It's coming.
Yeah. Take care. Stay safe.
Margaret.
Bye.
Bye.
Thanks, Martin. This was great.
Bye, guys.
Bye.
Thanks, everyone.
Appreciate it.
Bye. Thanks, Martin.
Thanks.